I'm Autumn Lockett.
And this is Mitch Randall.
And you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. And on this episode, Autumn and I are going to catch back up after having a week off. We're going to talk about what's going on in Israel at this time between Israelis and Palestinians. We're also going to be talking about what's going on the top of my house right now. And then later on in the pod, we're going to sit down with Dr. Amber Schmidtke, who is going to give us an update on what's going on with the COVID-19 as well as the rollout of the vaccine. So you want to certainly stay tuned for that interview.
I'm Reverend Starlette Thomas, a womanist in ministry and the host of a new podcast, The Raceless Gospel, from Good Faith Media. We're going to talk about that taboo trinity, race, religion, and politics. Season 1 of The Raceless Gospel has 5 episodes, 5 Sundays, if you will. We're going to take you to church each episode. We're going to talk about the sticks and stones, the skin and bones of Christian discipleship through the structure of a church service. And each episode, we're joined by a special guest who will bring a word. The Raceless Gospel Podcast. 5 episodes, all available March 22nd. I'm your podcast pastor, Reverend Starlette Thomas. Join us as we march into and beyond race, religion, and politics. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Autumn, come rescue me. Oh my gosh. I've got so much noise going on in my house right now.
Yeah, take a number. I have 4 kids. You really want to talk to me about noise?
I've got 10 roofers on the top of my house.
Okay, this might be the one time in history that your house is louder than mine.
Well, I don't know. I've met your kids.
Another roof? What's that about?
I know. My gosh, we had this big storm come in a couple of weeks ago. I mean, it was like a tiny, tiny sliver that went right over Norman, Oklahoma. And it wasn't just Norman. It was like my neighborhood. But it just marked a path all the way through Oklahoma and Arkansas. And once again, we're looking at having to get a new roof. We've lived here in our current home for 14 years, and this is the 3rd new roof that we have put on this house. And as I've said before, people who are climate deniers
aren't listening to this podcast.
They're not listening.
We hacked them off a
long time ago.
They're praying for our souls, actually.
They are. Mm-hmm. But the weather's changing. I mean, it's just becoming, it's becoming more intense. These storms are becoming larger. The hell is larger. I mean, they were talking about in Texas, which was part of the same storm system that went through Texas. They were talking about like Goliath-size hell. I mean, anytime you use the word Goliath to describe hell, that's some big hell. So,
it's a headache.
Sure. I mean, going through a roof. I mean, can you imagine a stone falling from the sky? I mean, these are little ice meteors is what they are. Little ice meteors that are falling from the sky. So
I've never seen anything like what you all experienced. I mean, people had every window in their house knocked out.
Yeah.
People had every window in their cars knocked out, which I'm sorry, but if you live in Oklahoma and you're not parking in a garage, what are you doing? Like, clear the junk out. Not trying to victim blame, but
that's always been fascinating to me growing up in Oklahoma. We're living in Tornado Alley, and I literally look down my street, and I would say about 70% of the houses, all the cars are parked outside. It's like, what are you doing? It's spring in Oklahoma.
Yeah, undercover. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm sorry about your roof. I'm thankful that you're getting a new one. Hopefully insurance came through for you on that.
They did. I'm going to be paying for it next year with my premiums, but they did paid for a new roof. We had some other damage. Didn't have any windows broken out, thank goodness, but a lot of garage door damage. When in the big scheme of things, it's not that big a deal. There's certainly a lot of worse things going on in the world. I think about our dear friends in India who are suffering under the COVID-19 pandemic, and just so many thousands of people who are losing their lives, who are sick. And then also what's going on in Israel. You've been catching up on what that?
Heartbreaking. Yeah, I'm confused by it, and I know its history precedes me, and most of my ancestors. Like, I don't really understand all the conflict that's there, but I know children are being killed, and I'm just very against that.
Right. Well, it's all about land. It's about land and power.
Holy land.
Yeah, Holy Land and power. I've never. I mean, I understand the biblical connotations with that sloth of land, I don't know what you'd not a sloth of land, but sliver of
Swap?
land, swath, sliver, because it's tiny. I mean, it's no
Hmm.
bigger than New Jersey, I think. And historically, it certainly has very important. Um, uh, it was a very important asset, I should to say, to ancient people because it was the only way to move from the Mediterranean if you didn't like going by the sea and you wanted to go by foot from the Mediterranean and the Middle East into North Africa. And Egypt certainly was one of the biggest players in the world at the time. So that was the way to go. You had to walk
Okay.
through there. It was called the King's Highway. And so I understand it's significant from a historical and economical standpoint. But you know, I've looked these days, and we now have boats, we have airplanes, we have vehicles that make travel a lot easier. And so then it becomes a religious issue and a historical issue from who has the rights to that land. And
Mhm.
this has been going on for centuries upon centuries. Even when I teach the story about Abraham, who is uh, the father of all three great faiths,
He had
Christianity.
many sons.
He did. You want to sing the song?
Right arm, left arm.
You're welcome, everybody who's listening to this car right now, because we know you're singing that song, and you're
And you will be
the
for the
person
rest
in
of the
this the
day.
person this the car next to you is looking at you like you're crazy. But the father of all three faiths, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, um, when he came into Palestine, as it was called at the time, he was a foreigner. I mean, he was from the land of Ur, where his father resided, which is in Iraq, near Baghdad. He came in, and when he came, he and his when his dad died, there in the northern part of Israel, just outside of Israel, actually. He had to make a decision whether he was going to continue on this journey into Palestine to find new lands to reside in, or to return back to Ur. He decides to continue the journey his dad set on, goes into Palestine, and immediately goes right through it to Egypt, where there's all the debacle about him lying to the Pharaoh that his wife was actually his sister, and blah, 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 and crazy things ensue after that. But if you think about it, I mean, he's a foreigner going into this land that was occupied and cared for by people groups. And so he goes in
Hmm.
and
We never seen that story before, have we
so,
there, Native American Mitch?
yeah. Oh, golly, it feels a little familiar.
Mhm.
But he goes in and lives among them, and it ends up being a great story. But then he begins to purchase land, and then there is this notion that God has told him that this was going to be his land, and it's promised to him. And a lot of times we have to remember that the Bible was not dictated as events were happening, but was written in a reflective way. So somebody's trying to interpret what occurred already. So at any rate, if you start to think about it, all three of these faiths, Islam, Jews, and Christians, they are all really existing within a land that, as far as ancient history is concerned, is really not theirs at all. But they keep fighting over it. And what's happening currently, there's certainly a lot of tension going on between the Israelis and Palestinians. The Israelis are trying to move Palestinians out of their home and relocate them in Gaza. The Palestinians obviously are not wanting to go. And of course, Israel is saying that groups like Hamas are in there, and the fighting has begun to escalate. People are dying, children are dying, and it's a complete catastrophe at this point. And I'm afraid that it's going to continue to escalate. A lot of critics of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blame him specifically for this latest escalation because a couple of weeks ago he was unable to form a government. So a lot of times when Netanyahu, who is a right-wing fundamentalist Zionist, and there's just really no other way to describe him. When things don't go his way, all of a sudden, this escalation of tension always develops and leads to fighting, and then everybody stops talking about his failures as a leader and start talking about what's going on with the fighting. And little known fact about Netanyahu I want to share. James Baker, who was the Secretary of State for President Reagan, I heard him speak down in Dallas, Texas one time, and he had just released a book. It's a wonderful book detailing his time in the Reagan presidency. He said there was only one individual that he ever barred from the State Department. And I'll give you one guess who it was.
Netanyahu?
It was Netanyahu.
Did
James
he give a
Baker,
reason?
he said he was a radical. Said he was an absolute radical and could not see any benefit at all talking to Palestinians because he did not see them as human beings. And so, this is the Secretary of State from an iconic presidency, conservative presidency in Ronald Reagan, saying this about Benjamin Netanyahu. So, there's a lot going on there. And, yes, there's blame on both sides, but let's put this in focus. The Israelis are trying to push out Palestinians, and they're trying to take over land. And Netanyahu seems to be behind it. And this is, again, let us pray for peace. Let us pray for a ceasefire, and that people would get back to the negotiating table to talk about a future that is filled with peace and prosperity for both Palestinians and Israelis.
Amen.
Well, Autumn, you and I had the distinct pleasure of sitting down and talking once again to our good friend, Dr. Amber Schmidtke. She just really shed some great light on what's going on with the current pandemic. A lot of good news here in the United States, not so good news globally in some hotspots like India. And Dr. Schmidtke talks about those and addresses those. But the bulk of our interview with Dr. Schmidtke is about the vaccine. And so it was really exciting news. What did you think about our time with her?
I'm always encouraged when we talk to Dr. Schmidtke. She gives great fiction book recommendations. And so I keep adding them to my wish list. The Murmur of Bees was one she recommended last time she was on the show, and I read it, and it was just beautiful. But I also am always encouraged by her hopeful sort of outlook. I loved the news that she had about the safety of the vaccine for children. As you know, today we can start vaccinating our 12 to 15-year-olds, and we're thinking by late fall that all of our little babies will be able to be covered and vaccinated. And, she approaches her job from faith, from a mom's heart. And I really enjoyed it. If you're a parent, really encourage you to spend some time in the second part of this podcast episode.
Yeah. And a scientist. She can be all three. She can be a person of faith, a mom, a wife, and a scientist. 4. I just listed 4. But she can be all. And she's just wonderful. And for those of you who are thinking about turning off this podcast, don't, because we talk in this interview about the vaccine possibly being the mark of the beast.
Dum, dum, dum.
So stay tuned as Autumn and I sit down with Dr. Amber Schmidtke.
Discovering Wholeness is a new podcast from Good Faith Media for healing trauma, for unearthing self.
Because trauma is so pervasive in our communities, it comes into our spiritual spaces, our churches. And I'm wondering how trauma is expressed in religious communities.
My experience of sitting in the pain, the shame, and the terror at times with some of the people that I have sat with that have experienced that judgment, but to the degree of those kinds of really strong words like abomination and you're going to hell. And it's so heart-wrenching.
I'm Kendall Rothis, an author, feminist theologian, ordained minister, and spiritual director. Join me and my colleagues, Kendra Frazier and Jillian Drader, as we gather each week to discuss trauma and spirituality, to stay grounded as we heal ourselves and walk alongside those who are healing. Join us and learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly, and we've got a very special guest with us. She's actually a returning guest. Dr. Amber Schmidtke has been with us before on numerous occasions. She is an epidemiologist and currently volunteers on the Georgia COVID-19 Data State Task Force. She's also worked at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and she is an incredible asset to our podcast. So, Dr. Schmidtke, welcome back to Good Faith Weekly.
Hey guys, it's so great to be with you again. I'm a repeater, which I'm excited for.
Yes, right. It's a very small list of people who get to come back and don't upset too many listeners. So
one more and you get a T-shirt. It's really exciting.
Truly. So while, top of the show, can you give us an update on COVID-19 infections and deaths? The numbers seem to be trending down.
They are, which is really exciting. If there was any question about whether these vaccines work, we are seeing it in the data, and it's an exciting day virtually every time I open the dashboards, right? Because we're seeing, I mostly cover Georgia, but even on a national level, we're seeing cases start to drop. We're definitely seeing deaths drop and stay low. We've sort of been in this noisy plateau since the winter surge where everything came down and things are bouncing around here and there, but they're low, which is great. And as vaccine eligibility has expanded to younger populations, we're just going to expect to see that those numbers continue to trend downward. In fact, like for Georgia, last week we had the third lowest case total for a week that we've had ever in the pandemic. Remember that,
wow.
We had to get going to get into the pandemic. And so if it's the third highest, we've really come down a long way, which is really exciting.
Now, we're going to talk we're going to spend a majority of our time talking about what's happening here in the United States. But there's been a rise recently in India that has kind of shaken the world to remind us that this pandemic, while there's a lot of good trending going on here in this country and other countries, this pandemic is not over. I mean, India is currently reporting over 300,000 cases a day and almost 4,000 deaths daily. So while there's a lot of good news that we're going to get to, what should this remind us of? How can we do we need to stay diligent to continue to combat COVID-19 globally?
Yeah, absolutely. So to put that 4,000 deaths daily in perspective, the United States recorded just about 4,000 deaths last week as a total. So they're seeing 7 times as much death as we are at this current time. And so it's a lot, and it's hard to wrap your mind around. There's a tendency when you hear numbers to just sort of remove the human toll of that. And I think that this is an important reminder that, public health isn't just American health. And the pandemic, that pan piece, means all of us. And so the pandemic doesn't end when you get vaccinated. It doesn't end when our country reaches herd immunity. We reach the end when everybody is safe from COVID-19. So we have a lot of work to do yet.
Absolutely. And part of that work is recently, I think just yesterday, the FDA cleared the way for Pfizer vaccine for adolescents from 12 to 15. What do you think this means for schools? And then I have a part 2 when you're done with that part.
Sure. I'm really excited for this. I have a son that's about to turn 12. It will be a huge relief for us to get him vaccinated, and my younger son will hopefully be just a little bit behind there. I think that it's incredibly important for summer camps, for return to school. What we've seen in Michigan in this sort of spring blip surge thing that they've had is that it's a lot of transmission happening among that 12 to 17 year group, especially associated with high school and junior high sports. And so those kids that are in close proximity, sometimes traveling together, is where a lot of this is happening. And so anything we can do to protect those kids, is in all of our interests. But of course, as we continue to vaccinate younger and younger people, for most of the pandemic, the bulk of our cases have been coming from 18 to 29-year-olds, but they're getting vaccinated now too. And so what that's going to mean is there's going to be a shift to that younger group, and they're going to become the primary drivers of the pandemic. So it's important for us to, even though their risks are comparatively lower than what we've seen with older adults, it's important to remember that low does not equal zero, and they have a lot of life to live, and we don't want to risk things like long COVID or other complications for them.
That's a great one.
What was part two?
So part two is that we have seen some indications that potentially by late fall, November, December, that even younger children will be able to be vaccinated. So do you have guidance for parents of those younger children who may be a little nervous
about the vaccines?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So far, we've had really good data when it comes to COVID-19 vaccines, especially Pfizer, when it comes to how effective they are. They seem to show even more effectiveness or efficacy with that younger, the 12 to 15 group, than they did with 18 to 29-year-olds. So they're even better for whatever reason among these kids. And their safety profile is excellent so far. They really don't have anything more than those, those side effects that we've experienced, where you kind of just feel a little yucky for the day afterwards. You take a good nap and you kind of get over it. So I'm hopeful that this is going to mean that we can all have that deep sigh of relief, because for you, Autumn, for me, I know for myself for sure, this pandemic isn't over until my kids are safe, or they're not safe, and so I was joking with you earlier before we got going that my son is turning 12 in a couple weeks, and happy birthday, kiddo, you're getting a vaccine. And I sound like a bad mom, right? But at the same time, I'm saving his life with this vaccine. And what I will tell the nervous parents is that I would never recommend something for you that I would not be willing to do myself. And I will be vaccinating my children, my nieces and nephews, whoever I can get their parents on board with as soon as I possibly can.
So good.
Now, Dr. Schmidtke, as of yesterday, 262 million doses of the vaccine have been given out over this country. 116 million Americans are now fully vaccinated. That means 35.2% of the population is fully vaccinated. Now, when you look at Georgia, the state that you have volunteered and part of the task force there in Georgia, they only have 27.8% of Georgians who are vaccinated. That's an 8% decrease from the national percentage. Can you interpret those numbers for us? Because, Georgia is such an important state. As Georgia goes, I think so does the South go. Is there something there that we're just not getting?
Yeah, so I've been volunteering with the Data Task Force, but a lot of my volunteer work right now is working with community organizations, business partners, et cetera, to try to get more Georgians vaccinated. And so, for a long time there, Georgia was very slow to respond to get their mass vaccination sites up and running. And we were consistently ranked 49th or 50th in the nation when it came to administering those doses. The state has come a very long way. They're still not ranked in a great way. They're still in the 40s, but they have clawed their way back up from that really low bar. And so I'm really proud of the work that the vaccinators have been doing in the state of Georgia. It's obviously a huge lift. But what we're seeing is sort of a combined issue of difficulty with accessing vaccines for certain segments of the population. And then, of course, we've got, that wait and see crowd, the people that just want to feel a little bit more comfortable about the vaccine before they fully engage. And then we've got people that are resistant to the vaccine. And so the combination of those three things, I think, is what's really holding Georgia back right now.
Okay.
So what are you hearing on the ground as far as reasons people are hesitating to get the vaccine? It seems like a no-brainer, but there is a significant number. 1 in 4 Americans claim they are not going to get the vaccine. So what's going on?
So first of all, I want to say that everybody has the right to have questions, right? And I want people to have the opportunity to ask those questions and get meaningful answers from someone they trust who is experienced in this area. And I see a mixture of two big things. There are questions that make a lot of sense to me. And then there are questions that somebody else kind of planted the seed for that person. And they've allowed themselves to kind of wrapped up in something that isn't actually true. So the misinformation.
Could it be Satan? I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. We needed a church lady moment.
Well, no joke. I called Mitch a couple weeks ago because in part of my volunteer work, something that was interesting was I was getting calls from people in 3 different parts of the country right around the same time saying, I am not getting this vaccine because I have heard from my pastor that this is the mark of the beast. And so I was like, whoa, I'm a scientist, right? And I grew up in the Presbyterian church, and I've followed the teachings and everything else like that. And I found myself in a place where I was like, I need to speak to somebody because this is outside my scope.
Yeah.
And
when you thought Mark of the Beast, obviously you thought Mitch, right? Well, I popped right in there.
Boy, you made that connection, Autumn. Well done.
No, but when we're trying to think about how are we going to reach out to people, and knowing that the work that you guys do here with communications and, engaging people that, in ways that aren't necessarily confrontational, but, that we want to try to engage them to come into this good thing that we're doing. It just seemed like a good person. Mitch seemed like a great person to reach out to.
And that was, you just said something that I think is extremely important for those people out there who are hesitant to get the vaccine and have honest concerns about it medically for them personally. I think what you said is just outstanding, that we need to answer those questions because, people, do have questions and if they do have concerns, putting a vaccine in their body, even though I may think it's safe and secure and I choose early on to get the vaccine, there's some people who, have these honest concerns about it. So let's get them the information, let's educate them. And then also these questions about theology and individuals who are, making this decision based upon a certain interpretation of the Bible. What I would suggest to them, as Dr. Schmidtke and I talked about in that phone call, was to get information from other sources, because as genuine as your pastor may be in their interpretation and application of the biblical text, there are other ways of looking at those texts that when we talk about eschatology and the end times, that there are other ways of understanding that, and that this mark of the beast isn't necessarily this vaccine, but it's been interpreted throughout history as other items. I can remember when I was a kid and the government was requiring people to get a Social Security number. I can remember pastors saying, "This is the mark of the beast. This is the mark of the beast." And it seems as though that's secular when it comes.
And in the '90s, it was a credit card. Yeah. I remember having family members who were putting the fun in fundamental and fundamentalist, and they were very anti-credit cards because that was the mark of the beast.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
So either way, whether it's medical or theological, we just really want to encourage people to get more information, get additional sources, because what you're hearing may not be exactly what, the truth is. And bottom line is, I think it's safe and secure. I think the vaccine is our best path forward to herd immunity and to, get back to some sense of normalcy in the future. So I appreciate what you said. Thank you, Dr. Schmidtke.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those of us who have been vaccinated, let's talk about COVID boosters. That always sounds fun to me, if you're going to get a booster. I don't know why. But could you tell us a little bit more what that might look like and who will need to get them and when?
So we don't know for sure that we're going to need these yet, but they're in development now for, just in case, which is really important. And so what's going on here is especially the Pfizer and Moderna companies are going ahead and sort of making a new version of their vaccines that take into account the unique mutations that exist in the variants that are circulating around the world. So far, for most of these variants, we are not seeing any real detriment, where the vaccine doesn't provide adequate protection against them. But it's sort of that let's prepare for the worst case scenario. And so that we're ready if that time comes. And so what this would look like is you just get one dose, most likely, of either of those manufacturers. And it's possible that other pharmaceutical companies will come online with this too. And it's really just meant to be a reminder for your immune system and provide cross protection against those variants should they arise in such a way that we're not getting good protection from the existing vaccines. So again, I don't know for sure that we're going to need them. I will also say that in theory, what it sounds like is that, let's say you got Moderna this time around, it wouldn't matter which manufacturer you got next time. You could pick whichever one is most convenient. There's no dosing interval, so they really will be interchangeable in the sense that you can get whichever one is closest to you at that moment.
Good. So you don't
That's
stay
really
on brand.
good news.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So great. Excellent.
So when we talked earlier this year, when these vaccines were just starting to sort of come out, you talked about the near miraculous elements of the mRNA technology in this vaccine and its potential impact on things like flu vaccinations and maybe even in HIV/AIDS. So are you still feeling hopeful about those and what's going on?
I do feel really hopeful still. And, as we were talking about the booster thing, part of the reason why they can do this as quickly as they are is because that mRNA molecule is really easy to generate. And you can sort of design it however you want. So if there is a mutation, you code it for that mutation and you plug it into the vaccine and there you go. They're really easy to manufacture. You don't have to grow them up in great big vats of bacteria, for example, or yeast. They're really easy to grow and to make many, many copies of. So when it comes to, because of that flexibility in the design, you can really put whatever you want inside of that lipopolysaccharide molecule or liposome, that we are putting together. Liposome into the vaccine. And so when you think about HIV, this is especially important because when a person is infected with HIV, that virus has a tendency to mutate so rapidly and so widely that what ends up happening is that by the time a person develops full-blown AIDS, they don't just have the original HIV strain inside their body. They have millions of different versions of the HIV virus inside of their body because it's mutated so much over time. And so the vaccine, what's really cool about that is it could be helpful not just for people prior to HIV exposure, but what about after they've been infected with HIV to sort of ward off that mutation capability that can, sort of end run the precious immune system that you have left. And so I see a lot of potential for something like that. And I think if you look at what Moderna is working on, they've got vaccines in the pipeline for all sorts of diseases that we have never had success in developing a vaccine against. So it could be things like respiratory syncytial virus that affects premature children, especially. And we've never had great vaccines or treatments for those kids. And so this would be a huge sigh of relief for those parents as well.
Wow.
I have chills. It's so exciting.
It is. It really is. Of all the bad things that came out of this pandemic, this is one thing that I'm really, really excited about.
It is really remarkable. All of the things that you just shared and things that you shared earlier in our conversations, like you mentioned, so much bad has happened with this pandemic, but my goodness, there's some silver linings to this cloud and a lot of good news on the horizon. So speaking of the future, what's the forecast for the summer? How's your family going to handle things like travel, outdoor activities, family get-togethers? I mean, really, here's what I'm asking. Can I go up to, my grandparents' house and shoot fireworks on the 4th with them?
So if everybody's vaccinated, yes, absolutely. Go have a great time and I'm happy for you. If you have a mixed, company sort of situation, obviously kids are probably not vaccinated yet. You still want to have some caution or precautions in place. But for the most part, you can do just about anything you want to do as long as it's outside. I would definitely prioritize outdoor stuff. And so for me, one of the things that our extended family realized during the pandemic was just how much we mattered to each other. And I'm sure many people feel that way. And so this summer, the whole family is converging in Colorado, and we're going to do a camping trip. And so this is all stuff where everybody's got their own tent, some of us have campers, but we're all going to be together. We're all going to spend time outside. All the adults are vaccinated, but because the kids aren't, we just want to have that extra layer of protection. And everybody loves camping anyway. So those are big things. And
Sure.
for our family, we've also, like as soon as I walked out of my second dose for the Moderna shot, I got an email from a resort in Hawaii that was like, come stay with us. And I was like, I should. Now that I'm vaccinated, right? But we did book a trip for the fall, and under the expectation that both of my children will be vaccinated before we get on an airplane. And I think the schedule is looking good that will happen. So,
well, I mean, again, a lot of positives. I mean, it looks like school's going to be back in session in the fall. The announcement of the vaccine for a younger populace of the adolescents is all good news. I do have one question for you, and because we're a faith-based organization, a lot of our listeners and supporters are people of faith, church attenders. They're wrestling with the idea of sending their kid off to a camp this summer, whether it's a church camp or a mission trip or things like that. What advice do you have for them when it goes to these traditional summer activities, but occurring at this moment in time?
So I think certain things like Vacation Bible School can be really successful, especially if you can encourage mask wear anytime that you're indoors, because they're already used to it from school. So I really don't think it should be a big deal. Overnight camps are a little bit more of a challenge, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible to be successful. I think that it's important for all of us to remember that in many ways, a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't changed. When you get together with others, you are assuming the risk tolerance that those other people have and incorporating it as your own. So let's say you've been very cautious over the last year, but you really want to see these friends, and they have been maybe a little bit riskier, but not dramatically so. What it means, though, is that when you get together with them in an indoor setting in particular, you are assuming the risk that they have. And again, taking that as your own. So I think it's really just important to know the other people that your kids are going to be with, and to feel comfortable in the risk tolerance that they also have. If you don't feel comfortable with that, then maybe it's a good year to postpone and wait till next year. But I think that, especially as we get more kids vaccinated, there's a lot that can be done here. And I think that all of us want to give our kids as much normalcy as we can. I would just say, don't rush into this. I think that it's important to just remember that the pandemic is still ongoing, and we still have a ways to go before we've vaccinated enough of our population to really, declare mission accomplished on this. So I'm hopeful, though, that we're going to see fully back to normal summer activities next year, but we may see an abbreviated version of that this year.
Playing off what you just said, one of the pushbacks that I get from people who are really anti-maskers. They may have been vaccinated, but they just don't see the need to wear a mask anymore, practice social distancing. They just want to go right back into the way things were. Is that if I'm vaccinated, why do I still have to wear a mask and practice social distancing? Can you answer that for them?
Absolutely. So I totally get it. For the most part, I'm 100% with them. Wearing a mask, or rather getting vaccinated, reduces your risk of having a breakthrough case of COVID-19, being hospitalized, or dying from COVID-19 by like 99.99%. It's a fantastic technology that we have. But the thing is, those breakthrough cases, as they happen, they only happen because we also still have high case rates in the community. And so the idea here is that, yes, most people are protected, like I said, to an insane degree. But there will be certain people that, for whatever reason, maybe didn't have as much of a robust immune response to their vaccination, or maybe they didn't complete the vaccination series. And so they're at a little bit higher risk. Maybe they're taking a medication that temporarily suppresses their immune system, for example. And so I think that it's important to still sort of be our brother's keeper in this sense, and still look out for one another. Wear those masks when you're indoors. But as we see, the guidance is changing all the time, and especially for the people that have been vaccinated. There's been some criticism of the CDC in the sense that some have said they're being overly cautious, more so than they need to be. But having worked there before, I will say that you really have to target your communications to be sort of to hit the middle of the population, and to also just, there's a tendency to want to just protect and save as many people as you can. And so I understand the tendency to be more on the conservative side of things, but I am encouraged by what we're seeing in the data.
Yeah, I echo that and agree with that 100%, because if we would have been more cautious at the beginning of this pandemic, we could have seen more lives saved initially. And I mean, it was still going to get here, but we certainly could have made better strides there at the beginning of the pandemic. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So in light of everything that we've talked about today, what is your more to tell?
I knew this was coming, and I still didn't prepare as much as I thought I should. I guess what I will say is I am really excited for this pandemic to be over, of course. We did not necessarily develop huge hobbies out of this. I thought we would with all this free time. I did bake bread and things like that. But, I think it's really interesting how many people have come out of this with really the awareness of, I don't want to do certain things anymore. Or, when they talk about jobs and the restaurant industry is really hurting for people right now. And part of it is because people have realized, I don't really like making $2.13 an hour or whatever it might be. And so I think that's really interesting. And it's affecting the way that I look at things now too, in terms of how I want to invest my time. So my something more is the post-pandemic life is going to be a lot more intentional. And I'm really excited for honoring the time that I have with my family. They're young. My kids are, youngish, they're adolescents, but I'm realizing that I don't have that much time left with them. So I am very much prioritizing what I have left.
Dr.
So
Amber
good.
Schmidtke, thank you so much for joining us at Good Faith Weekly. It's always a delight, and you are welcome back anytime.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in this week. We wish you the very best and hope that you've had a good week and getting ready for an even better weekend. Until we meet again, just remember, keep living good faith.